Okay, so after a
So,
little bit of difficulty, we are
Philip,
now recording this message. Go ahead.
yeah, just wanted to, because a couple hours earlier we discussed different presentation. Just wanted to make sure I can take over from the artifact, project artifact section, if that's fine with you.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
All right. So my name is Philip Ferrer. I gave you my introductions. I gave you some recommendations. Why don't we go now into this recorded class on managing communications. Now, one of the things that I would like you to keep in mind as we go through these, nothing that you don't already know when it comes to communications. I think, again, the difficulty that you may have during the exam is with the situational questions. Most of this, all of us, well, depending how old you are, in my case, too long, um, all of us have communicated. But when you think of communications, do not think of if you've only had domestic projects, don't think domestic. Again, this is a global exam you're taking, so look at it from a global perspective. Uh, I know I got an enormous eye opener when I became a global PM for Motorola because I mean I got to travel to South Africa, my projects there, Southeast Asia. I am Latin American, so naturally they sent me to throughout Latin America, but uh, I managed projects in Europe as well. But what I always thought was the coolest thing was the dynamic in communicating with folks that spoke your language. Well, actually, nobody ever spoke my language. I speak American English, like probably most of you, but the Europeans, folks from outside of America that have been taught English have been taught the Queen's English, which which is excellent English. I will admit that. In America, we seem to have included a lot of stuff into our language, and if it's acceptable to the majority of the nation, we just go with it. You know, so for example, when I was in India for a project there, and I met with the team in New Delhi, and we started talking about all the different aspects of the project. When someone presented their piece of the pie, if you will, I always would say, cool. Well, nobody said anything at first, but I kept on saying, when they finished their part, I would say, oh, that's cool, and that's cool. And the folks started wondering what the heck environment had to do with the project, right? To me, it was just in America, everything is cool with us, right? That's how we go about it. But much of my vernacular that I've used in America, I had to actually separate because I was speaking to people that speak the Queen's English, which I think is far better English as well. So the world common language for business has been and will for a long time at least be the Queen's English. So uh, I had to look at how I would communicate. I would ask folks that were on my team, no matter what country I was on, my core team, when you once we're done with the meeting, could we meet and then you could help me and uh, to understand if I've made a mistake. My first time in England, I was sitting down and we were going over a new project, and everyone was talking about, yes, I could have done in a fortnight. And I'm like, fortnight? And then the Brits came up with some other terms that I was not familiar with. But, you know, I played it cool, went back to the hotel, woke my boss up, who was not very happy. And I'm like, Dave, what the heck is a fortnight? What the heck? And I was going through a list. And so he went through it with me patiently. And then at the end of the call, he threatened to end my life if I ever call him in the middle of the night again, which, as you can imagine, I never did. So part of communications is, as I was always taught, before you go into a country, you're going to want to analyze the communications that they have. Talk with other PMs, other subject matter experts who've been in that country, because your first impression is always going to be your most important one. You're going to want to you're going to have to have a plan for your communications methods, your channels, how you want to communicate. Because your communications with your customer is not going to be the same way that you're going to communicate with your engineering team, uh, your hardware engineering team. It's certainly not going to be the same way that you're going to communicate with your software team. And what I mean by that is many of the teams that I had that were hardware and software were from multiple countries, right? So when it came to certain hardware products, I had to make a call to Germany or make a call to Brazil. When it came to software, I had to call another team in India, another one in China, and another one in Europe. So uh, planning these channels, planning how often, all this becomes very important. And here's something that is not part of the lesson, but something that for those of you who are going to go international, something you may want to consider. If your communications is not good, uh, did you know that every day that you're on a project and you're across that big pond or in Latin America, that you're being graded by the customer? So communications obviously is, I don't need to say it's important because I think you realize, and we've all realized here at AT&T how important that is. Communications project information. How are you going to disperse that? How often? Is it effective? You have to remember, whatever you do when you're in another country, you need performance measures for everything that will help you stay on track. Things get really complicated. I went to Brazil. I had a project in Brazil. If you don't know, there's two separate languages, well, more than two, but there's a minimum of two separate languages, depends on what part of the country. There's actually three uh, in Brazil and Argentina, because you have also the Asian influence as well. And I sat in my first restaurant that I ate at in Argentina, and my first time in Brazil. I was overhearing certain tables who were communicating in multiple languages. And I thought that was just the most fantastic thing on the planet. So communications, obviously, and more important, confirming what you said is what people hear and what people have received. I always get feedback from my team. One of the things that I always made sure with my teams is we have meetings. You have a lot of meetings, right? But I would meet once a week with my core team, that select few, and I would say, okay, uh, no bars hold. what what did I mess up this time? What did I say that I should have said better? And after we got to know each other much better, the feedback was excellent. And in receiving that feedback, I learned certain words and phrases to avoid, which really helps you along that path as well. So when we're talking about deliverables and tools, yes, a communications plan. And let me be realistic about my approach in teaching this. All these different subjects and topics that we cover in the real world, you will have already covered to not the nth degree, but you will at least cover a large portion of all of this before you even start a project. So all this information, every time I was um, well, I can't use that example all the time, but sometimes I'll say it this way: I would be asked to come into the negotiations and just sit in the corner and just start writing. And I wrote thousands of notes, right? Then once we were 90% sure we were going to win that contract, I'd bring in some of what was going to become my core team and have them write, and then messages and notes and all this. And then we sat in a room and we talked about this and that and all of this. So communications plan, all this stuff, if you will, is what you're going to be learning or not, or putting into action even before that project starts. Of course, you have to watch out because sometimes Dave came to me in the hallway smiling, which I knew, okay, I know where I'm going, and which he would just give me a good compliment. You've been doing a very good job, and la di da and la di da. Oh, by the way, here's your ticket to Singapore, and make sure that before you head out on Friday, that you've taken your wife out, and la di da. So, things like that happen when you're in international, right? So you're always going to have that communications plan. You're always going to want to talk with your team on your communications, how you communicate. You're always going to want to keep a list, right? And just to minimize the bureaucracy, because think of the scenario in which you're taking this exam. The assumption is that your project is going to have a start date and an end date. That start and end date can be 6 months, 12 months, 14 months. Very rare when one of us on the team had a 15-month, but uh, it's going to be short. So what we did was we used a simple Excel spreadsheet that we used just within our core team. And so we had all the stakeholders registered and all the team from our customer team as well. Because once in a while, the unexpected, you will have a shareholder that will come and visit you in the middle of your meetings or whatever you have. So all of this becomes most important, especially when, from a global perspective, which I think is the greatest thing on the planet that I used to do, don't do it anymore, but to be able to go to different countries and just talk with folks and learn from them, and hopefully they learn from my team as well. And of course, there's the update project communications as well. So when we're talking about communications, this is nothing that I have to read. You can glance and read these bullets faster than I can, and I'm not going to read these verbatim, but it shows you the importance of that communications. Now, I know most of you will say, well, I know this, right? Well, you may know this, but this communications effort takes on a whole different dynamic when you go to a country in which you don't know the language. There's your disadvantage on you. So you, along with your team, have to start considering all this project communications detail, internal, external, formal, because you will be without, and sometimes without advance warning, your customer will say, hey, I need you to come to my office, and you need to tell me about this or that and why this and why that. And you got to remember that your customer knows more than you do. Well, they actually only think that, right? But so they're going to ask you those questions. So, and if you're, for example, I had to travel back to the States. So if I'm in the States, whoever my backup would be, they would immediately grab that person to see if all that I've stated is the same, will be similar to what how this person communicates and answers pretty much the same question. So it's a risk, but risk management is also a part of this as well. So when we talk about a communications plan, here it is. This seems like a lot. It is a lot, but you have to remember that from the PMI perspective, they're assuming that you're going to take on a global project in which you are large and in charge. Your name is on that charter. You call the shot, all the shots. Uh, Project management professionals spend an enormous amount of training every year. And the reason they do that is because it is the project manager that whose name is on all those contracts, right? Because when you go in there, and let's say my project with Reliant Corporation in India. Uh, there's a lot of contracts. They were wanting what 112 cities with mobile technology, and so in this, as you can imagine, uh, your scope gets pretty large when you're talking 112 city locations. So my communications had to be exact. My team, we would constantly iron this out. and be prepared so that when we came in country, we already had most of this written out. It was just a matter of us meeting the individuals face to face, and pretty soon this that you're looking at with lots of names, you begin to memorize after a while, especially when you meet them face to face. You don't tend to forget that. So that becomes a very important part of your communications management plan. And here's, uh, I think this does an excellent job. Same, okay, they may have put it in a different format, but it's still the same. And as you can imagine, notes, notes, notes. Everyone has a lot of notes, but you want to definitely keep your notes secured because those are your private notes. Oops. All right. Components of communications. Yes, I think it's common sense. We have stakeholders, and there'll be a lot of different stakeholders. Again, we're looking at this from a global perspective. So let's give you a project uh, that you keep in mind. Let's just make an assumption here that you're going to have $100 million project. You're adding a new technology in this country. Uh, let's call it a greenfield because that's exactly what it normally has been in my past. And on as part of that, you're going to need to know who your stakeholders are in country, out of country, uh, the communications, how you're going to communicate the right information. And then you've got to consider your subject matter experts who actually speak the language, right? Uh, uh, all these bullet points that you see here, you are ultimately responsible for. But the fact that you are going through this in detail week after week after week, after a while, you tend to be surprised at yourself as to how much is in that noggin of yours that you have practically memorized. The only problem I ever had was uh, I began to learn based on the different countries. People were very patient with me, and I would finally learn their names, how to say it properly, I should say, and that worked out really well as well. But all these things are critical, important, and very important. Communications. There's a time associated with this, but money is associated with how well you communicate. Are you going to escalate everything? I think all of us have that experience of knowing that when you escalate everything, nothing gets done, right? But guess who is the lead on that? Well, that would be you because your name is on the charter. So you'll have to define the rules, and your core team will have to help you maintain those rules to make sure that others are just not escalating for the fun of it. And of course, the methods. There's a glossary of common terminology. Absolutely, there is. And I maintain those on my Excel spreadsheet as well for that particular country. Flow charts of information flow. Those are helpful. So, yes, but they're not as helpful if your project does include 5 or 6 teams from outside that country, but they can always be effective. Communications requirements analysis. Now, you're the lead PM. Uh, Maybe that's not a right word to use because of the exam. You are the project manager for this project. Okay. Now, across, I'll say in the US of A, and I say this because I've worked for quite a few different telecoms when I was a contractor. I contracted for 10 years and I just loved it. I worked for most of the telecoms, many IT organizations, construction organizations out there, right? So I could say this from experience, right? So uh, communications requirements analysis. Always, I was always looking at the different analytical techniques. I use them because it gets very complicated when you are looking at this from a global perspective. If your teams are in other countries, software, your hardware design team, so forth and so on, it's a little difficult, right? Of course, your construction teams would be in country, right? Wrong, because many of the depending on the technology you're adding, you're going to need to contract uh, other companies to come in to install that particular technology, that particular power grid that country may not. They're paying for all of this, yes, but sometimes depending on the type of system, it could be a satellite communications only systems with microwave that the grounding and system, the technology, the housing, all of those details, uh, the atmosphere and this is all taken into account is going to be different from a technology projects that are just mobile technologies. Or what about landline? I used to do central offices as well. Started with the Stroger switch all the way to the 5IE switch of AT&T, Nortel. So all this communications analysis becomes very important because you have to know your audience and those who are working for you, they have to be well educated as well. So these words of clear articulation took on a different meaning to me because I was American English. That's what I knew. When I went into many countries who spoke the Queen's English, they would sometimes, my vernacular, they would look at me like, what is he smoking? So I had to change a lot of my verbiage and conform to that country and those commonalities. Of course, once in a while, I threw in those American terms in there that would totally confuse them, but that was part of team building, and that's another story for another time. So, communications types. On the exam, you will be given situations, and some of those situations will be all put together in one 4 or 5 sentence questions, because often the answers will have, if they're talking about communications type, and you didn't read that question slow enough, but you kind of glanced through it pretty quickly. Uh, is the actual question of those 5 sentences focus on face-to-face communications, maybe print media, social media, maybe company website? So please, 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 please remember, if anything, when you start reading those questions, do not rush yourself through. You will be able to take that exam within the period that they're giving you. That's not going to be a problem. Some individuals that I've talked to in the past actually went through the exam twice. Well, actually, one person went through it twice and completed it 2 minutes before their time was up. Whereas the majority of others, excuse me, would, after they were done, they found that they still had 45 minutes, some an hour left. So they would glance over the situational questions because, as I told you before, at the end of all these classes, there's no way that you should have any difficulties with definitions, formulas, and their concepts. Communications mode. Yep, this again, this is I love the picture. About time they upgraded this accurately. So PMI has made some improvements. I don't even remember what pinblock version I started in, but it was in the 90s. So I think it was 3 or 4, not sure, but they've done a great job of showing you at least pictorials. And if you're like me, I need pictures for everything. Oh, excuse me. I need pictures for everything, and these pictures give you 1,000 words. Normally, a recommendation to some of you, uh, I usually would print this out, print these pictures out, and have 10,000 notes added to it, and that was my method. So, communications, obviously a big thing. Communications, yes, you could learn the definition. You could look at the reader book. I think the reader book gives you a more uh, a better definition. It's the same definition. Let's just say that they are not as cerebral minded as some of these definitions that come out of PMBOK. but I understand what groups are involved in what parts of those presentations that you're looking at to include this one. So I understand this. So again, you're not going to have difficulties with these definitions. Feedback, that's just common sense, isn't it? So it's nothing new there. Uh, the guidelines to effectively manage communications throughout the project, again, nothing new. So what I recommend is that talk to someone, whether it's your mentor or everyone on this call. There's quite a few. Everyone on this call should already know someone that's on this call. Once in a while, call one another up and ask them, uh, kind of like ask them questions about any of the subjects that you'll be covering. Because as you continue to, if you present this information to a partner, I presented this to my wife. I sat across the room while she she would read me the question definition questions or the formulas, and then when we got into a more focused part of these questions, uh, you know, I would talk to her. I would present to her these as if I was presenting this to that customer for that particular contract. So do this. This works and is very, very effective. Planning, uh, pretty much the same details you've seen here. Deliverables and tools. Well, you're in the creation process here, but remember, it's not you. Okay, it is your team that is developing this. Okay, if you go into these projects uh, thinking that you're large and only in charge, well, I've met many of those throughout my career, and they usually got airplane ticket and escorted out of the country. And there were many of those because they just didn't have. They assumed one that in that country what they say goes. How's that for not very bright? And they treated their team as well. And through the years, I have noticed a lot of folks that started out in that project in that country, how they were relieved. And the reason I could figure that out real quick is the power of email. Once you become an international PM, everyone will know your name. Everyone will know your name. Why? Because if when I went to India on a project with Reliant, everyone, all the contracting companies immediately knew my name, and they were already sending information on what they can do and what they can't do, and RFP. And so, please keep this in mind as part of the communications. Why? Because when you go on to take that exam, that interview, they're going to ask you a couple of question scenarios, and so you have to be clear on these definitions. The stakeholder categories, pretty much self-explanatory, nothing new there. You just have to be sure in this that you're looking at all these areas with your core team. But in this case, for the exam, you are your core team. But by communicating with one another, calling one another up, using all the terminologies from the PMBOK in your daily activity is going to help you greatly for that exam. Stakeholder engagement strategy, that's probably be, I would definitely pay attention to this slide because you're going to have 3 or 4 situational questions that are going to come out of this slide alone. And again, this is again to me, I think a real excellent matrix. Are you actually going to make a matrix for everything? You don't have enough time. Keep in mind that your projects have a beginning and an end. And often, for those of you out there, I'm sure you'll confirm this, that are just as experienced, if not more than I am, uh, when you're ready to complete a or win a contract, right? There's always that last minute negotiation that the customer knows they can squeeze you for. So maybe your 14-month project, when you get a call from Dave, and Dave says, "Hey, come on in, gather the team in the morning. We're going to sit down and we're going to talk about this." You're heading out there and your team has won the project, la di da, la di da. You come into the office in the morning, you get you print out the copy of the contract, and you always go to page 7 or page 8 where it says your 14-month project has been reduced to 11 months, and then you start freaking out because you don't have the time that you thought you had. So these matrices are pretty important when you go into these. So I'll end. Susanna, if you would be ready to take this from slide 23. But again, these are the guidelines to develop, to execute, uh, to validate. I think that's a great word, to validate a strategy when communicating. I just don't like the way this ends, but stakeholders and shareholders. And it's very important for the exam that you recognize all, oh, I'm sorry about that, that you recognize this as well. Uh, you are going to be communicating with shareholders. And why do I say that? That may be on your exam. The reason I say that is because I cannot tell you how many times, unknowns to anyone on the planet, that a shareholder was coming to visit. And guess what you do as a project manager, along uh, with that customer VP or director that you're with for months. Nobody knows they're coming. One, two, maybe three will come, and you have to sit and go through a whole day of the entire project. I mean, it gets pretty tense sometimes. So I'm a coffee drinker, so you can imagine I'd have lots of coffee. All right, Susanna, are you available to start?
Yes, Philip, thank you. Are we going to have a break now? You
Oh
mentioned
my
you.
lord, thank you very much for that. Yeah, let's do that. We're going to take a break till 20 after. And what I mean by a break is don't ask a question because you ain't getting an answer. Get away from your desk. Go outside. Okay, there's no sun? No sun. Go outside. Get a breath of fresh air. Just please get away, refresh your brain, and come back at 20 after. All right, folks? Go ahead.
Thank you.
And what I'll do is let me
Hey,
turn
Philip,
on.
I'm going
Yes.
to pause the recording for now, and then
Oh,
I'll
thank you
restart
very
it.
much. Thank you very much for that.
So, hello everyone. Welcome to the second part of the presentation. I can see many of you returned from the break. So let me start by introducing myself. Hope everyone can hear me well, by the way. My name is Zuzana Vitekova. I am based in Slovakia, working for AT&T for more than 12 years now. And I got my PMP certification in 2013. Ever since that year, I've been also spending some time coaching and training other colleagues in AT&T who wanted to get certified with PMP. I did a lot of on-site classrooms with my colleagues from Slovakia, which was very valuable. I think you can appreciate that when we are sitting in one meeting room and discussing these topics, it's much more dynamic. But I also spent some time on the online trainings. It was never with this big audience, but I hope it will generate lots of questions. So let me get into the last part of the presentation. Before we get to the artifact management, I can see that there are two activities here on the slides that Philip is kindly sharing for me. So one of them is creating a stakeholder engagement plan, and one of them is creating a stakeholder register. I understand these are two separate activities with your classroom. So I guess this is just a reminder placeholder for you to think about these. And then on slide 25, this would be the result of the second activity, the stakeholder assessment matrix. Okay, so if you can move the slide, Philip, I'll get into the topic of the project artifacts. So this topic or this part of the presentation, it will not be anything like super complicated, but it will provide you with some of the topics from the books that are easier to learn. So we will go through a couple of terms that you will learn to use, and then it will help you answer the questions, but also hopefully use as part of your projects. So project artifacts are really any documents related to management of a project. You can think of it as something that you create. These relate to documents, templates, outputs. So what we will be focusing on, as you can see in here, is to determine how the requirements for managing the artifacts, but also validating the project information is kept up to date. That's also an important part, especially for complex projects. And we will also talk about how to continually assess effectiveness of the management. So in all cases, artifacts relate to work of managing to the work of managing the project, not the thing you are creating as the output of the project. For example, project management artifact is the project closure document. The project deliverable is a new app. So what we'll be focusing on is the first part, so the documents itself. Can move to next slide, Philip. So for deliverables and tools, this will be quick, but then on the next slide, the project artifact characteristics. I already started with some explanation, but the definition from the book is that it's any document related to the management of a project. The project team will create and maintain many artifacts during the life cycle of the project to allow reconstruction of the history of the project and to benefit other projects. This could be also for audit purposes. This is really a tangible byproduct of the project. The term is primarily associated with project and design documentation. These artifacts can be either big or small. They can include things such as presentation slides, like if you are presenting some kind of design. In many cases, any document created in relation to a project gets tracked as an artifact. So better familiars with the term, it will get used a lot. Okay, on the next slide, we will have a couple of examples, as you can see in here. So this is where it gets more practical. I'm sure you have heard some of these already. You just weren't able to classify them as project artifacts. So these would be really the strategic documents like business case, project vision statement, or charter or roadmap. It could be logs, registers, could be secondary plans, could be really like meeting minutes that you store somewhere for audit purposes or for tracking history. For complex projects, you might find storing these documents very valuable. If you want to go back and revisit some decisions, or you want to go back and back up some budgetary responses or some calculations, it can also be very valuable for the other teams of project management team for lessons learned. So if they want to copy paste your output, they want to use your slide decks, or they want to see how you did the business case. So these are very important for storing for other purposes as well. There are some artifacts unique to agile projects as well, as you can see here on the list, and that could be product backlog, product increment, the roadmap, or even the sprint backlog. Okay, if you can go to the next slide, Philip. So the next topic would be configuration management. This is a tool used to manage changes to a product or service being produced, as well as changes to any project documents. So this is really used to control the iterations, ensure that the product specifications are current. This can be very valuable for complex projects where you have many parts and pieces, many deliverables. You are even using the work breakdown dictionary. You are using acceptance criteria for the work packages. So you want to ensure that the configuration management is in place to help you actually keep track. It can be many loose parts, many complexities. So this configuration management will help you manage this accordingly. It's really a collection of procedures used to track project artifacts and monitor and control changes to the artifacts. So let's have a situation here where you are working on one of the work packages. You are looking into work breakdown structure dictionary for acceptance criteria. You complete this and submit to quality control team member. surprisingly, they reject this output and share with you that the meeting acceptance criteria were not up to date, and you have actually established a new one. So this is an example of a failed configuration management. You should really pay attention to the versions and use the appropriate acceptance criteria. Could be one of the examples on the test as well. It also relates to the next slide, if you can move, Philip, so that's a version control. This is something I honestly use even for the smallest projects. So if you increase complexity, you also have to use better version control. But this is really a system that records changes to a file in a way that allows you to retrieve previous changes made to it. I'm sure you, even if you are not managing a project, you use version control for your benefit. So it really makes sense for everyone to keep track of what date was the document created, assign some numbering or some codes that will help you keep the version control. Some of the documents would have the version control at the very end to explain the strategy. So really make sure that each time the file is updated, it's automatically saved and given a new version number. This also helps when there are multiple team members updating documents. So usually we would be working in some SharePoint or T-Space, and there are many contributors to the project documentation. They can send you inputs or they can even customize it for you when you're out of office. Version control comes in very crucial. So when taking the exam, keep in mind that this is really system for recording changes to a file. This would be really the keyword for you. If you have a more complex project or robust project management system, you will have a more robust version control. You can even set up some base rules or some ground rules at the very beginning of the project, define this as part of the project management plan, the scope and other documents, how these will be managed from version control point of view. You can also use some software for the version control, or by using some project management software, you will get this automatically. So you can effectively track and control the changes within the software. If you are using documents like Word, Excel, and MS Office tools, you can also use it in the name of the folder. You know the drill. I'm sure that within AT&T practice, you have met at some point with the version control when using documents. Okay, if we can move to the next slide. So storage and distribution of artifacts. So this would be also some base knowledge when working in a corporate world like we do, right? So we try to store documents even outside of project environment, but within the project environment, you should store all the artifacts at a specific location. Some parts may be accessible to everyone, some parts may be accessible to just some stakeholders. So this should be also defined as part of the communication plan, like who does see what. You can dedicate some shared drive, you can dedicate SharePoint, you can use some cloud-based. What's really key is that there is built-in version control that you can check in and check out the document. You have some level of security depending on the project, and you can also share this with the wider team. So for cloud-based document storage, this is much easier for the team, but some teams, for restrictions or some preferences of the project team, use shared drive. Usually within our team, we use SharePoint or T-Space for sharing documents or for storage. But then also keep in mind the company rules for how long you can store documents, and then what should be the preferred storage for the project team. Okay, we can go to next slide, Philip. So that would be project artifact management, how to effectively achieve management in a system that would cover this topic. So project artifact management is a way to produce and control documents without unnecessary administrative overhead. You can standardize the formats and templates. As I mentioned earlier, you can even include version control at the end. You can specify storage documents. The key is to create a structured process for the review and approval of the documents. Sometimes we would keep a separate tab in Excel or a separate page on Word for approvals included as an object, just to keep it part of the document. You could also think about the security, so what should be shared with whom, and keep in mind time and distribution of documents, but also how long you should store documents with company rules or company specific rules. We do have a conclusion at the next slide, so that will be the guidelines to continually assess the effectiveness of management of project artifacts. So some key points here: use an appropriate degree of configuration management for your project. I mentioned a couple of times, follow any organizational procedures, develop an archive. So this can be really agreed with the team at the beginning of the project. Maybe your project management team, as a hierarchy in the company, has some preferred way of storing documents. So you usually revisit this with the management. You can use some templates. So for example, for project charters, project management plans, we would go and download latest template and use that one for our projects. And you should also implement version control of the documents, most simplistically by using a specific document numbering or dates. In more complex projects, you would have a strategy on version control or a table at the beginning or end of the document. Okay. On the next slide, there is another reminder for activity, creating project artifacts, and then let me summarize with the learning goals. So the learning goals, as you can see here on the slide, we have gone through assessing and managing risks, executing the project with urgency required that delivers business value, communications, stakeholders, discuss the artifacts, how to manage project changes, attack issues with the optimal action to achieve project success, and confirm approach for knowledge transfer. I hope you can keep this all in mind, because I've seen at the very end of the presentation there are 2 questions for the audience actually. So this is where we can get more interactive and ask you questions either on what has been presented or the reflective questions, as you can see it here. So let me pause here and ask the team, what are the aspects of executing the project plan that you found to be most challenging, and why? And what tools will you use to effectively execute projects in your maybe near future in AT&T, but also in some other companies, taking the practice to the next level? So team, this is your space. This is where you can contribute and maybe ask question or reflect on these 2 in here.
All right. So does anyone have any specific to communications, the subject we've covered here, at least this part? Does anyone have any questions that they would like to pose? And keep in mind, the question that you may be asking, maybe 10, 20 other people may have the same question. So do not hesitate. Anyone? Is anyone awake up there, out there?
Yes.
Yes.
Go ahead.
No questions. We are awake, but I think it was a very good discussion regarding it.
Okay. Then I'm going to ask a question.
Okay.
There's something this presentation left out, and it may, I'm going to have to do a little bit of research, but I know they've left something out here because it's going to be on the exam. So let me do this. Let me go backwards on the slides here. And I'm looking for, give me a second here. Okay, so here's my question. So we're looking at all these components of the communications plan. When it comes to documentation, what's one key item I don't see on here that should be on here that everyone in AT&T and every other company hopefully is most aware of? Any ideas?
Time zone?
Time zone. Well, yes, you're going to have a time zone on everything, obviously, because your project may be in Southeast Asia and well, your corporation may be located in the US, right? So, yep, but that's not, there's something very key here that everyone on this call is aware of. And the reason I phrase it that way is because everyone goes through the training, just as you would with any other company that you're part of. There's a
We're
key
talking
element.
like privacy or
You're getting close.
not
Document
privacy.
retention.
Retention, yep. Why? You may, I'm sure you think about this
For
from a
legal
regular,
reasons?
what reason?
For legal reasons?
Ah, thank
It's
you.
like it's like CYA, right?
Well, it's much greater than that, right? And I'll talk to Brian after this, and maybe it's in here, but I'll have to do a little more research. You will get a question on uh, the legal reason to keep all this documentation.
Proprietary is what
It's
I was trying to say.
proprietary is also correct. Can someone tell me in the real world how many years after you complete, let's say you complete a multi-million-dollar large project in whatever country, and in which uh, you are the project manager, um, how many years through the international court system is all that your documentation no longer valid? In other words, no one can sue you, or, there's no legal action that could be taken against you. Would anyone know?
Is it 7?
I know.
You're far away from the answer with 7.
Uh,
Anyone?
I'm just going to guess, but it's more like 30, right?
You're starting to get closer. Anyone else?
No, I don't have an answer on that one.
Okay.
How
And
about 50 years?
But would it be in the the EEF or those files like that would be proprietary information that would provide that information? Because wouldn't it be isolated per contract or something?
Okay, now we have several good points brought up. So yes, all this information will be proprietary, including every little email that was sent, even if that email has one sentence. However, because of the methodology that is used in the international world, I'll say it that way, when you die and you're gone, uh, your company could still be sued.
So would that be in the OPAs or something though?
It would not be listed in there. The question will be on the exam, but it may be listed in the OPAs. A reason I bring that up is because it's going to be on the exam. And there is no answer to that except the word, remember this word, ongoing, right? The legal issues are ongoing and will never come to an end. And if you've ever,
Like life cycle, ongoing. Okay.
oh yeah, this life cycle will last way past your years.
Right.
And at first I used to laugh at that until one company that I worked for, they actually had a project that was completed 10 years earlier, but that country sued uh, the company who was the lead on that project. I mean, it was 10 years later, and I'm thinking, what's up? 10 years? Are you kidding me? Well, it took 10 years for it to go through multiple international court systems until it made it up to, of course, the United Nations. And guess what? It still hasn't been settled to this day. So I wanted to stress this only because, again, I don't see it on here, but please remember for that 1 or 2 questions on legalities, okay? Legal issues will always be ongoing, period.
Okay. So
And
should you include like in your project a repository?
Absolutely, you must.
Because you're
And
be gone or dead or whatever, how do you keep your records intact so that they're accessible?
okay,
You send that
so
over to whoever when you close the project out?
in the real world, those projects are stored in a vault, whether it's an electronic vault. Uh, well, it's a combination of electronic vault and a paper vault. For example, there are many international, well, I'm not going to say many, all international companies, they will have a portfolio that is finalized at the end of the project. So at the end of all my projects, what I had to do is I had followed the corporation's requirements, electronic. We made sure everything was protected. We had various layers within our team that only certain individuals can access certain information, such as cost, along with all the written contracts and written this and that, designs, you name it. Many of them are multiple binders in length. And what large companies will do is they will store all that in a vault. When they bring new PMs into the picture, they'll go through several weeks, sometimes months of training before they're even given part of a responsibility on a project. And they'll let them go into the vaults. They'll let them research projects, how they went. And usually the research will be to that specific country that you may be assigned. So since I knew uh, Europe quite well, we gathered at the end of each project. We did a final review with all the key shareholders, and then we stored that away. And a year later, I would be on this other project, and someone would assume this country and the projects they're in. So they would go over all my data and interview me and all that stuff. So that's extra. That won't be on the exam. But please remember for the exam, every document, every email, no matter if it's even a sentence in length, is a legal document. And some of these you just can't throw away. They have to be stored. They have to be secured.
Thank you for that.
Susanna, did you have anything else that you wanted to share?
Thank you.
Okay. All right,
I have a
folks.
question.
Sure.
I have
Go
a
ahead.
question. It was just interesting when you were talking about languages and all that in each country. And so in South America, particularly in Brazil, what are the three languages that they speak?
Ah, of course
Just out of curiosity.
you asked the question, and um I immediately forgot. That's how old I am. Someone help me out here. In Brazil, there is, of course, Spanish. There is several Asian languages, but if you go southwest, Portuguese. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. So when I started my project, I started that project up north. Then Bob and I, we went down south to one of the manufacturing plants, and we also had to bring in contractors because we staged everything. So if a company, for example, wanted a brand new cellular network, we would actually bring all the components together. We would test them in that area, and then we disassemble them and ship them to wherever they were going to be shipped. And in putting a lot of those contracts together for certain specific groups, yeah, I got to learn about the culture, the Portuguese culture. I got to be with family who, when we all ate together, I asked them, just ignore me and speak as you would normally do. And they said, okay. And in the family, uh, one spoke Portuguese, the other one answered in Spanish, and then the other answered it in Asian language. And I thought, I was just, wow, I had a smile from ear to ear. I had heard of it. I'd never witnessed it. So that's where I began to change my whole ideology on how to communicate, how to get the right amount of feedback, and so forth. So that's one of the things that I've always loved about international project management. The fact that you get to visit so many different countries, so many different language, so many different cultures. I mean, I was in seventh heaven as far as I was concerned. So,
Very nice. Thanks for sharing.
yep. All right. What I'm going to do then is you got 15 minutes left. So I'm going to go ahead and shut this down, but you still have 15 minutes that you have to dedicate to review this data before you end your day, because we have to make sure that we cover the full 2 hours to make sure you get your 35 hours in. So you're all professionals. I'm going to leave the last 15 minutes for you to review your notes that you've taken. And then at the top of the hour, you can release yourself. That sounds good. With that being said, thank you very much, everyone. Please remember those key details, and also remember for the exam, it's an international exam that you are taking. Think of it as an interview. Think of it as you taking part in that interview, and at the end of the interview, that person will have $100 million project across that big pond, and you're on your own, because many countries do not have not even a 7-Eleven at every corner, right? So thank you very much for this evening. Go ahead and get yourself some rest as well. And please remember, if anything, the holidays will make it exceptionally hard on you. So please carve out, yep, carve out that time to keep yourself updated and moving forward. Thank you. Susanna and I say have a great evening, and I'm sure we'll be touching base again in the future. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Art. Good night.
Ahmed, you could cut could stop recording.